Hey everybody, welcome back to the Overwatch Report. I'm Brian.
I'm Ben.
And this is the official podcast of the Defran Fan Club.
Oh yeah.
Yes, we love him. He's our favorite. And we'll go to the ends of the earth to defend his honor. Isn't that right,
Yeah.
Ben?
Oh yeah. I've been seeing a lot of stuff about how we hate Defran from people online, and that cannot be further from the truth. We are both huge fans of our boy Defran, and he's going to be a star.
Yeah. So there's no even need to worry about his possible actions. We just believe in him.
Oh yeah, I believe in him.
All right, let's get down. We're not talking about Defran anymore. In fact, we are talking about the San Francisco Shock.
Yeah, we're talking about what I'm going to describe as the hashtag most improved.
Ooh.
San Francisco Shock.
Right off the bat, calling your shot. All right, well, let's see who is coaching this most improved team. We're starting off with Krusty, the South Korean coach, former coach with the Uprising, and now he is the head coach of the Shock. Tell me a little bit about Krusty.
Yeah, so with Krusty, it's a little hard to evaluate. He left the Uprising in between stages 3 and 4 last season, and then went to the Shock. But it's and that was right after the Uprising had their perfect stage, the only team in season 1 to have a perfect stage.
No big deal.
Yeah,
it's fine. We're just so used to success in Boston. It's like,
right,
whatever.
And then after that, the Uprising did kind of have a really awful stage 4. So
nope.
No, it didn't happen.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't remember that either. No. I keep hearing people talking about it, but I don't remember that being a thing. So, but yeah, so a lot of that, can theoretically be chalked up to them leaving or them losing Krusty leaving the team. However, there is the case that has been brought up that Krusty was already planning on leaving the team since the end of stage 2, and there was already insane drama between Krusty and Huck, and all of the Western versus Korean drama that has carried over and resulted in Stryker and Nico leaving the team, and Gansu almost leaving the team. But he's the one remaining person who wasn't a casualty of the drama from last season. So it's going to be interesting to see what Krusty can do from the start of a season, because he did come in, and while the Shock had a very bad stage 1 and 2, they, even without Krusty, before their rebuild, had a pretty decent stage 3.
Mm-hmm.
And then with Krusty, I'd say they were about even in terms of performance they were with stage 3. So when they finished stage 3, they basically rebuilt the entire coaching staff. They got rid of Brad, who's aka Seffi, who is now the head coach of the Reign, and they rebuilt everything and brought in Krusty and 9K. So that's where we're at.
All right, so moving on from Krusty, let's talk a little bit about Junkbuck. He's an American coach, former coach for Toronto Esports. Tell me a little bit about him.
Yeah, so he is the only coach who survived the coaching purge they did at the end of stage 3. Mm-hmm. So that, I guess that shows something about the org's confidence in him.
Right.
Like I said, I think that they performed pretty well in stage 4 after that rebuild, but not in a significant way different than they did before. So it's kind of tricky to, the coaching staff, I think, is the most difficult thing to interpret for the Shock. Mm-hmm. Just because they made the changes that they made, and there wasn't really an easy correspondence between their results and their coaching decisions. So it is what it is.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about 9K, the South Korean coach. He formerly coached for NRG Esports.
Yeah, so their academy team. So he was brought up from Energy Esports, which is the Shock's academy team, after Stage 3 during that rebuild. He was brought up under to like be the coach under Krusty, kind of be like the second, third in command. And I think he's done a pretty good job for himself since then. Again, like Krusty, it'll be interesting to evaluate his coaching performance from the start of a season, especially with a much stronger roster. So we'll see.
So let's go on to the players, starting off with Baby Bay. He's an American player. He plays DPS and mains McCree, Widowmaker, and Soldier 76.
So the story of this team is going to be their DPS line, their DPS core. They have 5 extremely strong DPS players. All of their DPS players I would consider above average, and Baby Bay is no exception. He is a really great Widow player. He's one of the best American Widowmaker players in the league, in my opinion. And on most other teams, he would be a consistent starter. But because this lineup has so many strong DPS players already, and in terms of looking at last season, he didn't see a ton of play until like the end of the season in Stage 4. It seemed like Krusty kind of, when he came in, preferred starting Baby Bay over Architect, but we'll see exactly whether that'll carry on when they have people like Striker on their roster now. So yeah, it's the real question with the Shock. I think most of the players in the Shock are really strong now. The question is just going to be how they put together their team in terms of like which players get starting time, which players are going to be on heroes depending on how the meta breaks. It's going to be a big question mark, but if they need a strong Widowmaker, I think that Baby Bay can definitely show up for that. But they do have other players who can play Widow decently as well.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about Super, the American tank, who means Reinhardt and Winston.
Right, so Super is another player returning from last season. He's really good on Winston, and he was particularly strong when the dive meta was in full swing, and that's kind of where he shined. But otherwise, he's kind of just like an average main tank. So we'll see if he sees play. Here's another instance of a player who was a starter last season, at least in certain instances, who might be rotated out for one of the new players. I think that Smurf is probably a stronger overall main tank. So we'll see exactly which way the Shock want to go with this role. But it's not necessarily because Super is bad that he wouldn't see play over Smurf. I think that Smurf is just stronger overall, and I think that Super is a lot more limited in his hero pool. So.
Fair enough. So let's talk a little bit about Sleepy, a.k.a. Wakey. He's an American support player in main Zenyatta and Ana.
Yeah, so I think that Sleepy is probably one of the better players from their roster last season. He's a great Zenyatta player especially. But it's interesting, again, that they brought in a new player who can fill the role that he already sort of fills in the team in Violet. So it'll be really interesting, again, to see which of them sees the most playtime. The Shock might be one of these teams that kind of like really plays with their lineup a lot for the first stage until they kind of feel like a good chemistry between their players. And it's not a bad place to be, right? Where you have so much versatility in your roster, where you can kind of mess around with the lineup a little bit and not have to worry about how they're going to perform. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think especially with the meta being changed a little bit, a lot of teams are going to be kind of playing around with their rosters early in the season. There certainly are right now, so it's not too weird for a team to be, mix and matching, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think that the Shock have kind of built themselves in a way where they're able to have that kind of flexibility. And, even if Sleepy doesn't see starting time, I can't see a situation where he doesn't get subbed in situations, because he is a very, very strong player.
All right, moving on from Sleepy, we have Sinatra, the American DPS player who mains Tracer, Genji, Doomfist, Brigitte, and Zarya.
Yes, we have another super strong DPS player, Sinatra, who most recently played during on the U.S. team on the Overwatch World Cup, and similar to the issue that Zachary had, where because of their performance in the UK match, a lot of people were pointing at individual performances as being weak. A lot of people were saying that Sinatra was a weak point on the team in that match specifically. And again, like I mentioned with Zachary during the Fuel video, I don't think that that match is indicative of Sinatra's capabilities overall. When he was brought on after he turned 18 last season, he was a big reason why the Shock kind of went from a low tier team in the first half of the season to a mid-tier team in the second half of the season. He's extremely strong, especially on Tracer, and then also he has a lot of potential on Genji to really carry certain maps. And the tea that's coming out of the high-level PTR play right now is that there might be a Tracer meta in the future. It seems like Tracer is seeing a lot of play on the new patch, and if that's the case, then I could definitely see Sinatra filling that role. But we also do have Striker on this team, who is also an extremely strong Tracer. So it's going to be really interesting again to see which of them kind of takes the reins in that regard. Sinatra might end up kind of playing more on Genji, but he might also just not make the cut if we're only seeing two DPS players see play. So that's where we're at.
All right, tell me a little bit about Nevix, the Swedish player. He formerly was part of Cloud9 EU. He is Flex, and he mains Genji, Ana, and D.Va.
Yeah, so Nevix, similar to how we'll probably talk about Architect coming up soon, was a starter mostly as an off-tank player, particularly mostly starting D.Va during most of the first season. But it seemed like after Krusty came in and the coaching staff was rebuilt, the team kind of leaned more towards starting Choi Hyobin instead. So it's going to be, again, another situation where we have two players that have comparable skill sets and seeing exactly where the team's going to want to go with their lineup setting. I think that the big thing that's going to be the determining factor of who kind of sees play in that off-tank role, if that off-tank role is something that we even see, is going to be what heroes are going to be mostly played. There's potential before, like I mentioned, that Roadhog could see a lot more play in upcoming meta, and I think that Choi Hyobin is probably better on Roadhog than Nevix is, so that could be a deal breaker for Nevix seeing starting time, but we'll see.
All right, so you just mentioned the guy, Architect, South Korean DPS. He mains Genji, Junkrat, Pharah, McCree, and Widowmaker.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, Architect saw play in the first 2 or 3 stages, primarily in a DPS role on Pharah and Genji, and then a little bit on Widow as well, because they didn't have a super strong Widowmaker besides Baby Bay. And during the stage 4, after Krusty came in, it seemed like they did switch over more to playing Baby Bay in that role, particularly when Widowmaker was more common within the meta. And so, yeah, again, it's going to come down to where does the coaching staff want to play people and which heroes are going to be necessary. If Pharah is a key DPS hero coming up in the meta, then I could definitely see Architect seeing play as a 3rd or even 4th DPS slot. There are a lot of people speculating that a quad DPS build is potentially possible, something we're going to see as a common composition in stage 1. So we'll see if that's necessarily the case. And if it is, then maybe the Shock will be able to get full utility out of their DPS core they have. But otherwise, I'm not 100% sure that Architect is going to make the cut as a starter. So.
All right, so let's move on to Moth, the American support player who mains Lucio, Ana, and Mercy.
Yeah, so Moth is a pretty solid player, solid healer, but he's not really a star. He's not going to be carrying the team. He's not like a top 10 healer in the league or anything like that, in my opinion. And looking at last year's roster, I think that he was probably one of the weaker points, which is why it's interesting to me that they prioritized picking up Violet when I think that Sleepy was already a fine player in that role. So we'll see whether Moth has any kind of consistency issues in Season 2. But I think that their roster overall is strong enough where it shouldn't be a major issue that Moth is kind of a lower tier player, in my opinion.
Fair enough. Let's move on to Choi Yobin, the South Korean flex player who mains Diva and Roadhog. And as you just said, Roadhog might be the key for him seeing a lot of playing time.
Yeah, if he's going to be seeing playing time, I think it's probably going to be on Roadhog. It's going to be very tricky. Again, we're talking about evaluating these players and whether they're going to see start time, particularly on a rounded roster like this, in the context of not really knowing what compositions are going to be played going into stage 1. So it's a lot of speculation at this point. But I think that it's more likely than not that Choi Hyobin will see start time. He saw start time most recently in that role and with this coaching staff. So I think that's probably going to be where they're going to go. They didn't bring in any new players in the kind of flex tank off tank position, so there's not really a ton of competition for him for that playtime besides Nevix, who I mentioned earlier. I think that Choi Hyobin is a better player on Roadhog than him. So we'll see again exactly what all of this is totally dependent upon what heroes and what compositions he play. So
fair enough. Let's move on to Smurf, the South Korean player who is a tank and mains also Roadhog.
He mains Winston mostly.
Well, not according to Liquidpedia, Ben.
Okay.
Have it up with them.
He is the first new player coming in for the Shock. He's coming in from GGEA, and GGEA had a ton of issues as a team, but Smurf was not really a contributor to those issues. In fact, they had issues, in my opinion, despite the fact that Smurf is a great player who is extremely mechanically talented, and he's also a very good communicator, good shot caller. I think that it's very likely that when it comes to Smurf and Super, we'll see kind of like a NYXL Season 1 Mano Janice kind of relationship where Smurf will see more play because he's slightly better and he's a better shot caller, and Super will be kind of relegated to coming in on certain maps or mostly just riding the bench. So that's kind of what I feel. I think that Smurf is a very good pickup, but I don't think he's the best pickup that the Shock has made. But that's not, it's not a strike against him.
Right.
No pun intended. That's that's just the fact that the Shock made several really strong pickups.
All right, well, speaking of, let's talk a little bit about Rascal, the South Korean player who formerly played for the Spitfire, the Fuel, and NRG. He is a DPS player, meaning Somber, Genji, Pharah, McCree, and Mei.
Yes, so Rascal was a very, very good pickup. This is a great team for him to be on. A lot of the issues that he had in Season 1 were just that he couldn't find a team where he really fit. We had him coming in on the Spitfire in Season 1, and he is a very, very strong DPS player, but the Spitfire already have Birdring and Prophet. He's not going to see play over Birdring and Prophet, right? So where exactly he's going to fit into that roster? He's not. So that's why he was dropped. He got picked up by the Fuel, and the Fuel were basically in free fall when he joined their roster, so that didn't work out very well. So he left them and he went to play for Contenders, where he did a pretty good job bringing NRG. Did a pretty good job hard carrying NRG to top 4, in my opinion, in Contender Season 2.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about Violet. He is a South Korean support player, meeting Zenyatta, Ana, and Widowmaker.
So I mentioned Violet earlier when I talked about Sleepy, and then in general in terms of the way the team is set up. I think that Violet is really good. He's really underrated, especially when you look at his run on O2 Ardiant in Season 1. He was a big contributor to their upset of Element Mystic in the quarterfinals during that playoffs. And then he also helped a lot during the semifinals and brought them to a second-place finish in that season that was much higher than they were expected to finish during that season. So he's a great on Zenyatta, and maybe the Shock is kind of expecting potentially Moira to see a little bit more play, especially with without tanks being necessarily in the meta as much. That's a big reason why Zenyatta is as strong as he is right now, as he has been, is because there's so much synergy between Zenyatta and strong tank lines, which is what we've been seeing. So maybe if that support role moves away from Zenyatta and towards other heroes like Moira or like Ana or something like that, then Violet could definitely see a lot of potential in that role. For now, we're just going to have to wait and see again.
All right, so let's close it out with, I think the player you're going to say is the best pickup. Striker from South Korea, formerly of the Uprising, a DPS player who made Tracer, Junkrat, Pharah, and Widowmaker.
Yeah, so we have Striker, a player who I almost bought his jersey last season when he was on the Uprising.
Although maybe you could get it for cheap now.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, but yeah, it was very, very sad. First to hear about the drama that involved him tangentially in Season 1, and then to see that he was sold away to the Shock because Striker was probably the best player on the Boston Uprising. His Tracer play is insane. He's one of the best Tracers in the Overwatch League, and he's a big part, especially in Stage 3 when Tracer was big, of the Uprising's 10-0 stage. The only reason that he left the Uprising is because of the drama, and he's coming into a situation where where Tracer is probably going to see a lot more play in the meta, the Shock definitely need somebody who is going to be filling the role of playing Tracer, and it's really, I think that, like you said, Striker was the biggest pickup, and a lot of the reason why I have the Shock rated so highly is because they picked him up, and because they have such a strong DPS core overall, and DPS as a position is going to be super important, at least coming up. And there are other players, like they made pretty good adjustments in their lineup overall with their other players. Yeah, right now I have the Shock ranked number 5, I think, overall, 20.
So it would be a really big improvement from Season 1 to Season 2.
Yeah. Actually, I think I have them ranked number 4. I think I have them 4. Right
bigger.
below the big 3.
Right. Yeah. All right, so is there anything else you want to add about this team before we sign off?
No, I'm very excited to see the Shock perform. I think that, well, they had 2 show matches against the Valiant. I know that there was some speculation of issues because of technical glitches in the second one, but they did win one of those show matches, and the Valiant are another really strong team. So I think that we have a really strong competitive team here. Probably one of the first. Well, I guess the Titans are also a very competitive team that we've talked about. This is potentially a team that one of the first teams we've talked about that has, in my opinion, a solid chance of finishing Stage 2 on top, or Season 2 on top.
All right. Well, for Ben, I'm Brian. Everybody watching, thank you so much for checking us out. If this is your first time checking us out, please subscribe. We talk a lot about Overwatch. We have streams between Jenny, Ben, and Starry pretty much every weeknight. And yeah, we're on Twitch at twitch.tv/WeGetEverything. We're on Twitter at WGEverything. And Ben, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Ben Sharon, on Twitch at Trey of Spades, but mostly just when I do stream for where I get everything. So, but you'll see me commenting and stuff when other people are streaming. So.
Right. And of course, if you want to check out a little bit more, if the videos and the streams aren't enough, we do have a blog going on that Dylan and I have been working on. That's www.wickedgoodeverything.com. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.